welcome to this latest edition live stream. My name is Frank Lavinia, and I am trying to see where I can get my name up there. There we go. My name is Frank Lavinia. I'm the co-host of Data Driven and Impact Quantum, as well as the founder and namesake for franksworld.com. Today, October 13th, 2023, Frank's World turns 28. That's right. 28 years ago today, I guess technically it was in the evening, early evening, I uploaded the first bits of HTML, GIF files, and JPEG files that made up the site. And it's been an eventful day. It's been actually a good day because I just got out of a radio interview at a studio here in DC for a news network that people in the DC, the DMV as we call it, Federal News Radio, and WTOP. So if you've ever needed a traffic report for the DC metro area, this is the radio station you would turn to. This is before Google Maps and Waze and things like that. Hey, I see a chat. Andy, how you doing, man? I might stream later because this is a special occasion. Happy birthday, Frank's World, indeed. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, I mean, first off, if you look at the site today, the archives only go back to 2017. And the reason for that is because a lesson I learned where you can't really trust the cloud entirely to manage your data and your backups. We recorded a whole episode of Data Driven live as it happened. I think the episode was called "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your data is?" Yeah, so keep in mind that the web was a very different place back then. The web was new. There was no Facebook. I think Zuckerberg was probably still in preschool. It was a different place. And your web, your ISP, your internet service provider, was usually some kind of local company startup. Mine was a company called iOS, Internet Online Service, which was a division of a company called IDT, International Data Telecom, or something like that. And they were based in New Jersey. And with every hosting account, with every ISP account or internet dial-up account, you would get like a meg. They were trying to compete with each other. So you have a meg or two of storage space on the web. And again, this is way before Azure. This is way before AWS. I think Amazon was only a year old at this point. So in October 1995, I uploaded these files, and the site was called Frank's World. How did I come up with that? Well, funny story. It origins back to 1991 when Wayne's World movie had come out, and I had a college roommate freshman year. I'm not going to mince words. He was a jerk. And for some reason, he couldn't stand Wayne's World. Couldn't stand. I don't know why. And he really hated those tabloid newspapers, like Bad Boy, like is found in, Las Vegas or something like that. Right? He really hated that. So I came up with my brand new Macintosh at the time, Macintosh LC. I had desktop publishing program it was Aldus PageMaker. So I came up with a fake newspaper modeled on the Weekly World News, and it was called Frank's World News. And that I would print that out. I had a laser printer, which at the time was kind of a big deal, right? I was a bit like the nerdy version of Ron Burgundy. And I ended up printing up a couple of episodes of this, and I hung it on the door, much to his dismay, and stupid stuff. So when the years went by, 4 years went by, was like everyone had a web page, right? Everyone created a website, and that's what everybody had a home page, right? So I was like, what will my home page be? What should I call it? And that, I reached back into my mind. I thought, hey, I could do Frank's World, but do it online. And then hence the origin of Frank's World. Frank's World has taken on a lot of different forms over the years. Originally, it was and you can go to the Internet Archive on the Wayback Machine or whatever, you kind of see this. Originally, it was an online version of that fake little tabloid that I had. It was a bit like The Onion in a sense, or Babylon Bee, I guess, today. Um, so I had a couple of goofy stories there. Um, and then I started creating more sites off of it. Um, the Schnauzer space, because I had a Schnauzer dog at the time, created a website for the dog. But I made a website because everybody and their dog literally had a website back then. And I, but I made it kind of like a cyberpunk themed site. So kind of like my goal was to create um, a dog site unlike any other, and that was how that did. So I created a few other ones. A few things that come to mind was prank calls. So big fan of the Jerky Boys at the time, and there was a number of websites that were popping up, people showing off their own prank calls. Now I know prank calls are childish and immature, but this was 28, 30 years ago, when I was more childish and more immature. But I really saw it as, and I described it at the time as performance art for the masses, right? Is kind of how I saw it, right? A well executed one, not the harassing kind, but the well executed ones. Kind of like early Jerky Boys, where you can hear the person on the phone stop and ponder the meaning of their life, right? It was just so ridiculous, right? And then there was one guy who said he had it, but he was, his name is Nate. He actually lives in the DC area now. Oddly enough, how things kind of converge. Um, so I hosted it because I had something special when I switched to a new hosting provider. I had access to Real Audio, which was a streaming audio platform um, that Interland, that was the name of the company. They're based in Atlanta, and they offered a hosting plan. So I outgrew the built-in space for my ISP, and then I registered a domain name, and then kind of the history of Frank's World begins from there. Um, Over the years, the function has changed. There's no more prank phone calls. When I moved to Europe, I put all my travel photos up there because Adobe had this really cool thing at the time. You would give it a directory of images, and you would point it at it, and it would basically create a thumbnail gallery of images. So I just would upload it to the thing, and I would be able to share my travels and things like that um, with friends back home. Again, this is before social media, this is before social networks, and I would argue it was probably a better time because um, you had more control over your data and your brand, which is why in 2004, when I did start a blog, I had the easy option of using weblogs.asp.net because they were trying. Microsoft had a big blogosphere at the time, and they had it open to the general public. And as appealing as that idea was, I already had a domain name. I already had a brand more or less. So I was like, I'll just use this, and I'll just install .text, which was a blog engine written in .net. And I actually had the server running for the longest time in my basement. And I also had another server running Outlook. So I had my own kind of Outlook server. It wasn't called Outlook, it was Exchange. See how the time and tide has changed the way you word these things. And so I had that for a while. I ended up patching a Exchange server at the time was a full-time job, and that was not what I was getting paid to do. So I was doing consulting, and then eventually I got a hosting provider that let me run a .NET instance kind of in the web, and I installed .text. And .text eventually went away. I think it became Community Server, and then it was eventually decommissioned too. But with the .text was written in an early version of .NET. I think it was 1.1. So when 2.0 came out, the writing was on the wall that they wanted you to upgrade to community server, which had a lot of things that blog. Scott Watermasick, that's the guy who made .text. And I remember upgrading to .NET 2.0 on the server, where they did it for me, I think, or they forced me to do it. And I sent an email to Scott, like, "Hey, how do I get .text running on how do I get .text running on um, on .NET 2?" And because they changed the way web handlers were done and some underlying stuff. And he basically, while I was waiting for the reply, I remember I was in a hotel room in Orlando for TechEd 2005, which was the old Microsoft Ignite conference. And I'm like hacking away at the code, right? As my brother from another mother says, Andy says, alt code is tested, usually in production. So I was actually literally working on the code, uploading it and see if it worked. Because I only had my little laptop with me. I shudder at that now as I think about it. So, long story short, I get it working, right? Stack Overflows, Google searches, all that stuff. I managed to get it working. And then I get a reply from Scott, because I think he was actually at the same conference at the time. And he wrote back, "I don't think anyone can get that running on .NET 2." And I wrote him back, "Funny thing about that, I actually had it running." And I met him later that night at a cocktail party or whatever, reception, and we were joking about that. And I stayed on .text until when did I leave .text? It would have been shortly after. Oh, that's right. I joined Microsoft, and they had something called Project Orchard, which was an open source blogging platform. So I did all this work on getting the data structure. I wrote a bunch of SQL scripts and code to get all the data out, because at that point, this would have been 2011. I had 7 years worth of blog posts on the system that I wanted to take with me. And I took all of that stuff, ran a script, and injected it into, from one database, the .text data model, over to the Orchard data model. And it worked. I got it working. And it was fantastic. I ran that for like 5-6 more years, I would say. So it wasn't until about 2014 when it was very clear that Project Orchard was not getting any traction. It was an open source engine. No one really contributed to it. WordPress had kind of dominated. And about 2014, I saw a bunch of themes and plugins for WordPress, and that's when I switched everything over to WordPress. Again, with how did I do that? I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I did the same thing. I ran a similar script where I took the Orchard data model and inserted it into the WordPress model, and that was running fine and dandy. It was running on Azure. At the time, Azure had a relationship with ClearDB to run the database, the backend database. And the name of the database escapes me. It would have been not Mongo. Oh man, I really need coffee. Anyway, ClearDB ran their instance of it was Postgres, I think. Somebody put in the comments, because I'll look it up later. I'm in Chevy Chase, Maryland right now. I'll loop back to that in a minute. So then from there, everything was fine until one day, all the data was gone. And it turns out that ClearDB had a glitch in their system. Scott? No, I looked for somebody with a college, but I was like, that's weird. Little distracted. So sometimes the stream of consciousness, sometimes the stream comes to a halt. Yeah, so they lost all my data. Like they just, because of I had a free plan through the Azure account, and they said they canceled my subscription because I wasn't paying it. I was like, it's a free account. How can I be behind paying on a free account? And they went back and forth. They admitted they were wrong, but the data was already gone. So that led to a lot of bad words being used. I called Andy. Andy and I kind of talked through it. We actually did a podcast recording immediately because I wanted to kind of underscore the idea that, because everybody was like, but it's on the cloud, it's going to have backups. These people managed to delete everything, including the backups, which was kind of alarming. So ever since then, I really had a decision to make. Do I keep the blog going? Do I change it up? I did look at possibly scraping our internet archives and pulling everything back, but I kind of made a decision that I hadn't made before. So I was like, you know what? 90% of that content is about Silverlight and WPF and XAML, right? No one's going to be looking for that anymore. And Windows Phone app development. And I was like, at that point, I switched to data science. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start the blog anew. And that's why the archives only go back to 2017, if you look at the blog today. So the site has been big part of my life, and it's been a good test bed to learn web development. It's been a good test bed to learn stuff and experiment over the years, and it's really opened up doors in ways that I wouldn't imagine. I would say my biggest regret with Frank's World has been the YouTube channel. So in 2013, I created a Frank's World TV. Still there today. FranksWorld.tv. I even registered that domain name, and it points to the YouTube channel. And it never really caught on. Like, in fact, I've been doing it now for 10 plus years. I have 400 subscribers, right? Clearly, I'm not Mr. Beast. Clearly, I'm not PewDiePie. And that's okay. I'm not really, looking to be that guy. But, 400 subscribers over 10 years, that's like 40 a year. So when the time came in 2016, I thought about starting a podcast about AI and data science. One of the things was, one of the challenges of Frank's World is that it doesn't really say what it is, right? So that's why the podcast is called Data Driven, right? And the other thing too is that if it's called Frank's World, I'm not going to get a lot of people that are going to be contributors to it, right? Because it's literally got my name on it. So I decided to keep Frank's World as a blog, and I rebranded it as Frank's World of Data Science, or Data and AI, I think is what it's called now. And then start the podcast as kind of a separate path. And that's where I hooked up with Andy, my brother from another mother, and we started it. Because I think the name of something, because we live in a much more crowded internet with a lot more noise, the name of something really has to say something about what it is. Like if Amazon started today, they couldn't go by the name Amazon because it would just fall into the ether. That's why you see, shoes.com or, that sort of thing, Zappos.com, right? It has to have some kind of hint at what it is. And that actually has been a far more successful strategy. And the site today, actually, I have a target of hitting, over 100 blog posts per month. And that has led to optimizing content creation and things like that, which is actually turns out to be a very good skill to have in this day and age, where I can, with very little effort, I have a lot of automation now where I can create a blog post pretty quickly. I created a system called Dingo. I've talked about Dingo before. So Dingo helps me really kind of do that and be very efficient in that. And that I've changed the focus of the site to really be kind of an aggregator, or a aggregator of YouTube content is basically what it is now. Anything kind of else I put on other channels like Impact Quantum or Data Driven. And that's really been the story of Frank's World. It's opened up a lot of career doors. It's forced me to solve problems. It's forced me to do things that, my day job wouldn't do, right? In the early days of the internet, it was not seen. It was not an obvious path of, if you're a web programmer, like that was a career path. My first job in the web was webmaster at BarnesandNoble.com. And I say this with a certain amount of irony because I'm in front of the Amazon Fresh store in Chevy Chase. And there's a certain humor I get out of it now in terms of our goal was to crush Amazon. Spoiler alert, didn't happen. And I've done a number of streams from Barnes and Noble and things like that, talk about this, but it's interesting how Frank's World has changed over the years, because at the time, because I had my own site, because I had done a lot of the web CGI programming and stuff like that, when they were looking for a webmaster, I had all the skills ready, right? Even though it wasn't a for pay job, right? I had the skills because I'd done the extra work. And I there's a quote I hear is that you get rewarded in public for things you do in private. I think the web kind of changed that. I was able to kind of have a public web facing site um, in a way that um, I don't know. There was a point to that. Then the beeping of the truck distracted me. Anyway, I want to thank everyone who's been supportive of Frank's World through the years. People watching this, people like and comment, even the YouTube channel. All 400 wonderful human beings that you are. And today I got to be interviewed for Federal News Radio about data and AI and kind of what that looks like for federal agencies. And in the DC area, TOP and Federal News Network are kind of like a huge deal. So it's kind of like one of those little things that are on my bucket list. And I think it's really cool that I got to do it on Frank's World's birthday. And I don't know, I just think it's cool. It's been a huge boost to my career over the years. It's like I said, it's created opportunities where, in the early days of the web, a lot like now, when you have a lot of large language model experts, um, at the time I could say like, no, I've actually built this. Like, this is my website. Go to it. Check it out. franksworld.com. And at time, having your own like .com address was a big deal. This is before GoDaddy. I had to register with, oh man, who did I register with? Would have been through Interland, but it would have been Network Solutions, who at the time had a monopoly on domain names. But that's an internet history lesson for another day. With that, I'm going to go get myself some caffeine, and I'm going to check out this Amazon Fresh. And I want to thank everyone, and hope you have a great day. And I'm going to play the outro image, outro graphic, and yeah, have a good day. Thanks, and stay tuned for the next 28 years of Frank's World. Do some fun stuff, as always. Thanks, and great day.